Welcome, everyone, to the ongoing AI and our empowering learners for the age of AI. It's our fourth annual conference. I see a lot of familiar names here, so fantastic to have you all here. Welcome to our second keynote of the day. Just before we dive in, I just want to give a shout out to Grail itself is supported by member universities, and we call these charter universities. These are organizations that are particularly interested in tracking and driving some of the conversation around AI. And I just want to give a shout out to those. So a few of those are SMU out of Dallas, Dr. Lipsmeyer, who you're going to hear in a session later on, has been critical in helping support that. Texas A&M, we've got a whole crew from Texas, from Deborah Fowler to Justin Dellinger and others that have been supporting this organization. We have National University out of San Diego, Arizona State University out of Phoenix, University of Queensland, which is really close to Aneesha's home stomping grounds, University of South Australia, University of Texas, Arlington, and Monash universities. I'm just flagging that these are the partners that support the work that we do. With Grail itself, I know all of you are saying, George, what does Grail do? Well, basically, we're trying to promote conversation to help make sense of AI. We host monthly sense-making lectures. We host webinars. We have resources on the site, leadership workshops, and there's a couple of literacy programs that are ongoing around AI and literacy. And basically, we're trying to foster leadership development, and we're trying to foster just general awareness of the effects of AI. We're doing this 4 years running. We have our next conference in person, our first one in person, actually, which will be happening in Phoenix in about 5 weeks' time. I'll drop in a link into the forum later on to that as well, so you can track that. But for now, I just want to start by kicking things off for Aneesha, who's we're delighted to have her do our keynote today. And I've known Aneesha for a fairly long time, sometimes just sort of being aware of work she's doing and thinking she's doing. And she fits, to my thinking, one of the best profiles of an academic, which is curiously engaged and playing with emerging technologies. What works, what doesn't work. And you're going to find with Aneesha, it's not just that she's an outstanding thinker about the ways that technology can, and AI particularly, can impact us educationally, but she plays with it. She has really deep technical knowledge coupled with good knowledge of the social or the learning analytics dynamics of it. And I think that combination is rare. Quite often in these kinds of events, you have good grounding in some of the psychological sciences or good grounding in the data sciences. And I think with Aneesha's marriage of the two, specifically a strong AI focus. And if you track her Twitter thread, I'll drop it in a bit so you can have a look at that. You'll see it's a constant experimenting with AI and tracking frontline trends, going really deep technically, but also doing a great job from a practical lens. So I can't say enough good things about Aneesha, but I'll throw it over to you. Thank you for taking the time to spend the afternoon, evening, or morning with us. Over to you.
Thank you, George. That was a really humbling intro, and thanks for following me on Twitter all these years. It is not so long ago that I would not have thought of the possibility of delivering a keynote. So thank you for this amazing opportunity to share my thoughts on generative AI and education. We find ourselves in a truly remarkable era with unprecedented possibilities. Rather than navel-gazing, my focus today is firmly on the present. Each example of an educational application of Gen AI that I'll share has major implications for learning, teaching, and the development of learning tools. So ChatGPT was released last year on the 30th of November. It is hard to believe that we are still 1 month away from this being released a year ago. Certainly, I think the time has passed really slowly almost, particularly when you look at all the developments that have happened since it's released. So while there's been a steady increase in the capabilities of large language models from, I would say, around about 2019, and many of the thought leaders in education had started warning us of the implications, I don't think anybody could have envisaged the capability of ChatGPT when it was released. It provided a conversational user interface to interact with an AI that had the capability to understand what we were asking it and also respond. It could even take feedback and adapt its output based on the feedback. To me, ChatGPT and other large language models in the generative AI space provided a new conversational human AI interface, a new platform for us to build other tools and other applications on that we had previously not thought possible, particularly in education. So I would say rarely has a technology possessed such a profound potential to both revolutionize and challenge the boundaries of education. And I say this, living through introduction of calculators in high school, desktop computers being readily available, laptop computers being readily available, and even the World Wide Web with the internet becoming available. I particularly think there's never really been this revolution and challenge at the same time. So not only did ChatGPT have the ability to support learning by answering questions, providing feedback on both writing and programming, it could also assist with brainstorming and provide a new platform on which to build intelligent, personalized chatbot tutors. But at the same time, it also challenged the act and the very process of learning itself, as it could provide direct answers. It could write full essays. It could even do your programming for you, albeit sometimes with bias and errors. So in my opinion, I don't think there's ever been such a challenge to the foundations of education and particularly how we perform assessment of student learning. And I've tried to keep the bullet points on the slide rather brief. I could certainly extend these to exceed the space available on the slide. But I really just thought a few of these key points really express the profoundness of this new AI that was unleashed upon the world. So initially, and I'd say a lot of this started happening in January, with educators, universities starting to think about the impact that this was going to have on assessment. And a lot of what I saw on social media, in corridor discussions, was initial thoughts of ChatGPT that I really didn't agree with. Particularly things like it can't take feedback. I'll change my assessment to include more reflection because I don't think it can reflect. It definitely can't do math. I'll be able to detect it. Surely there'll be tools to be able to detect its use. I'll fact check all my student assessments because, it's obviously going to produce false facts or it's going to be out of date. I'll try to include images, and images might be more relevant to the questions that the student would answer. And I'll get around ChatGPT in that way. My personal favorite that I haven't included here is professors basically going, it doesn't know who I am. I particularly found a lot of these to not be true from my own experiments with Gen AI, and also particularly the process and the updates to these systems have happened fairly regularly. So it is now not true that it can't do math, and it is definitely not true that it can't analyze images as well. So my initial thinking around ChatGPT, and got to remember this was the 3.5 version, was that it actually involved a lot of feedback processes. So you really needed to have a higher skill level of or knowledge of the domain in which you were working, and your evaluative judgment was really important. And so I've included, this is really one of my initial trials with ChatGPT, get it to do some argumentation, throw in an additional challenge in that I wanted it formatted so that I could actually put it into a argument mapper tool and have it all render. It worked quite well. It didn't get the format right, but the fact that I could teach it to do a new format and include new arguments really made me think this is really going to be life-changing. And it's not really going to impede a person's ability to learn or engage or get out of this what they want. These are my initial thoughts. But prompting is changing, and it is changing rapidly. And this is going to have a much bigger and further impact on education. So if you think everything that you've experienced in the last year has challenged you, the challenges, I think, are going to get even greater. So I think right from the start, I knew that there'd be reusable prompt templates that could be used and shared that would take away from that direct interaction that a user would have. Personas have turned out to be quite important. And you can see right from the start of ChatGPT's release, there were popular GitHub accounts sharing act as prompts for all sorts of domain areas inside there. There's also been new prompting techniques. So I'll talk a bit about chain of thought and chain of density or chain of diversity and how these actually will impact how people interact with ChatGPT. But by far the biggest impact has been the programmatic access to the API provided by companies like OpenAI and Google that now allow developers access to this API without necessarily having to run up the hardware and the inference costs associated with that. And this obviously lends itself to a range of new learning tools that can be developed. So all of this is having a huge transformative impact across all industries, and I would say especially education, particularly all aspects. And, you can focus on teaching, learning, but I think also research. And I think research in this domain is really important. And I'll touch on this towards the end of my talk. So my talk is actually the possibility of now. It's not future gazing at all. Most of what I cover here today is things that can be achieved right now with the Gen AI tools that are available. Some are obviously paid subscription, but these possibilities exist now. I'm going to put that into 4 domains that I look at: empowered educators, empowered learners, out-of-domain creators, tools to scaffold learning, and then I'll have a quick look at the impact it's going to have on learning analytics and the understanding of the learning processes. But there is also, so those are possibilities and those are all good things. And if I was to do this talk 3 months ago, before I transitioned to being an actual academic, I'd probably not be including anything on the right-hand side. But having been teaching a course this semester, I think the impact particularly of prompting changes and that very simplistic prompts in the future will deliver sophisticated results, as well as these systems giving the ability to give direct answers to learning, might impede the development of problem solving and critical thinking skills. And I think this is where research really needs to provide a foundation to bridge these 2 gaps. So my talk will talk about both of these, the possibilities, how we can make them a reality, but also just some of the way that prompting is changing that we need to be aware of. So we'll start with empowered educators. And I include learning designers and educational technologists in this particular area as well. So I wanted to get an understanding of how particularly ChatGPT is currently being utilized by educators. So I went on the internet searching for, the top 10 best prompts for educators, the top 50, the top 100. There were a few of those. I collated them all together. And then I actually subdelegated the task of finding the topics to ChatGPT. And I've shown my prompt here to do that. I actually also got it to put into a nice little table and select one defining example from each of these. As you can see here, there's a range of diverse uses already. And these are all being shared as prompt templates. So, anything from communicating with parents to developing lesson plans, but also just looking at classroom management strategies or different teaching strategies included in there, as well as professional development. So the obvious ones you'd be thinking of are, feedback and writing of emails, but just that it's encompassing a lot with teaching already. So I want to show a few examples, and I'm going to be showing a few prompt examples, mainly because these are all text and they're not all that technical, but also just to showcase the possibilities of now a little bit better. And this comes back to, early days of not thinking ChatGPT can do math. And it is a little bit lacking in this area with logic and reasoning. But there are things that you can do. And so I just want to illustrate this idea that you can get it to create something like a worksheet on a particular topic, specify the year level, what the subject matter is, give it instructions, but also ask it to return things in a certain format. And quite a powerful discovery with these large language models is this idea of telling it to think slowly and think step by step. So here you can see I've actually gotten ChatGPT to not only come up with questions for a worksheet in a particular area, but also write the equations that these questions need to be solved, and then write out the solution step by step in here. And I did ask it to do questions in increasing complexity, and I don't show the result of that here, but it was able to do that essentially. If you did have more complex math topics that you wanted to cover and it wasn't returning the right calculations, I would swap over to, if you were using ChatGPT Pro particularly, the advanced data analysis tool, where you would actually get code to verify that in your prompting. But I just wanted to illustrate this example and some of the capabilities that are now available for teachers to use. Equity notwithstanding, this was, I think I ran this in the Pro subscription. Automatic course content generation is also being made available. There are a number of companies already in the space, and I think a few of the large LMS providers are actually starting to incorporate this. One of the first that I saw was from a company called Knowledge, where you could provide, YouTube videos, PDF files, could generate the content, but it would also generate H5P activities. So things like fill in the blanks, mouse overs, so a lot of this automatic content generation is already happening. And I do know of people that are using this quite successfully at the moment. My own, or I should say, just returning here, I think that course content generation is probably going to be the first of the biggest uses of Gen AI within the teaching space. It does save time, but I think also just because educators can validate the content before they release it to students, and also that the release pathways relying just on HTML or SCORM are already there, as opposed to chatbot tutors where I think there's still work to validate them and release them. It makes that a little bit more work to do, particularly. So I wanted to actually show how easy it is with some of the prompts that are required to actually generate content. My own experiments have been with LiaScript. And so if you've never heard of LiaScript, it's actually an open source project that converts Markdown into a full module or course module with navigation and search, and also some quiz features. I think it's used a lot in the OER space. So my first experiments were can I get ChatGPT to generate content, but can I also get it to generate it in this Markdown format? So I already had a course that I could deploy that, had good navigation, had search, had some sort of quizzing inside of it. And it turned out to be remarkably easy to do. And I share here some of the prompts that I use. And it's really that I was programmatically able to do this. You could certainly do this just from, using the normal chat UI that, Google Bard or ChatGPT provides. But the fact that I could access the API and programmatically run these meant that, I really just needed a user to enter a topic and an audience. It then goes about deciding what needs to be included in the table of contents. And then for each of those table of contents items, I then run another prompt programmatically to generate content, also generate some quizzes in specific formats. And I got this to the point where it was even thinking up creative projects for students to work on and do. Another big impact this is going to have on teaching and learning particularly is, and I'm seeing this emerge in a lot of recent publications, is the automated classification of automatic classification to grades, or providing direct feedback to a rubric. Well, I think these initial papers have been quite good and well received. To me, they largely serve just to gauge the comparison between, humans versus ChatGPT, and gauge the actual capabilities of these generative AI models at doing those sort of high-level tasks. It's obviously going to be harder to just deploy those purely in education. And I really just wanted to put here a reminder, and this paper really put it quite well, is using large language models to provide explanatory feedback to human tutors. And so we need to recognize the human element, and we need to design these as not just automated classifications that, will hand off all of this more complex work of rating, marking our learners' work and providing them feedback to a separate AI system, is that we really need to be getting humans in the loop. So this whole idea of decision support for educators is something that we need to start working on right now. So we now move on to my next main possibility, which is empowered learners. So yeah, particularly the affordances of these tools, the affordances that these tools make to actually help you learn are there. But it's really down to the learner having the agency to use them in the correct way, having the motivation to also use them in the correct way. They certainly, by default, are able to answer a lot of questions directly and do a lot of things. But you can also get them to act as your personal tutor. So I give an example here of me asking ChatGPT, you're an expert scientific abstract writing tutor. Can you give me some experimental data? And then ask me to write an abstract and also produce some charts to visualize that data. And then let me basically write the abstract, and then you can critique it. And this worked quite well. I even did this inside the, as you can see, the advanced data analysis version of ChatGPT, where I ask it, give me some experiment data, but give me some charts to go with that so that I can evaluate both of those together. And with my really badly written abstract that I did give it, it actually gave quite good feedback in this particular realm. So the opportunity is there for learners to use these in good ways. And again, it's, really the engagement that our learners have with these tools in what we should be interested in. So it's not really the student that uses these tools 5 minutes before the assignment is due. And, if they use a prompting technique or, prompts have really improved, they get a really sophisticated result back. We're really after the, long-term usage. And dare I say, the self-regulated learning that needs to go on with using these tools. So emerging also at the moment, there are a few publications. So I've really called out the Ethan and Lilik Molik paper here, which starts to classify the different types of roles and almost personas. So at the start, I said that personas was going to be a prominent prompting technique. And so you can see here, there's a number of different roles that a student can use and different prompting techniques that they themselves can use to help them learn with these tools. I particularly like this paper because it shows both the pedagogical benefits and the pedagogical risks involved with each of these techniques. Mike Sharples has also done a lot of work in this space at just coming up with new ways that learners and educators can use generative AI, particularly like the possibility engine, generative AI coming up with new ways to express an idea, or having an opponent for argumentation development inside here. So you'll see a lot of these different ideas are already starting to emerge of how we can actually start using this and how learners can themselves use it to empower themselves to learn. So we now move on to out-of-domain creation. And so you will ask, what is out-of-domain creation? So out-of-domain creation to me is where we've got an educator or a learner or, even a business user who uses Gen AI to create something that they were not specifically formally trained to do. So you could think of this as someone starting with a business idea that now uses Gen AI to generate their full software stack as an MVP. And again, I relate this back to education. Is that now educators, learning designers, educational technologists now have the ability to actually design their own learning tools. So you don't particularly need a developer for a lot of what you're doing. If you've got the ideas, there's really a very specific domain knowledge terminology that you need to know to get this right, though. Not necessarily the specific technical programming ability. So the example I give here is a prompt that is to generate, a little glossary tool, but it creates this template for it. So it's essentially saying, we want it in this particular format, include the JavaScript and the HTML all together. And that's so you don't have separate files that you then are not going to know how to deploy, or your IT department's going to get really upset that you calling external JavaScript files. So that this prompt is really designed to get around that specifically. But the key kind of domain knowledge that's needed here is that you really want the persona of a web developer and that you want this in HTML and JavaScript. That's as simple as the domain knowledge that you need to do this. A lot of the time when people approach me to say, ChatGPT, I had this great idea, ChatGPT generated some code. How do I deploy, how do I put it up on the web? What has actually happened is they didn't include that they wanted it in HTML or as a web language, and they landed up getting, so ChatGPT will default here to using Python and made them a desktop app. So that simple knowledge of those terminology words can actually get out of domain creators a lot further down the path. And we think about the AI literacies. I think this is a key AI literacy. It's not using so much the AI because people will come to it with ideas, but just knowing the right words and terminology to use in asking for things. And of course, from that one prompt, it was able to, generate all the code in one file. I actually got a searchable glossary, but it also included a few of the terms in the area that I asked it inside there. So it kind of pulled in the knowledge and did all of this inside there. And so I'm actually starting to see a lot more, specifically in the learning design communities, a lot more of this creativity in tool creation already starting to happen. So now I'm going to move on to tools to scaffold learning. And of course, here we specifically start to look at the chatbot tutors that you can develop. I really wanted to show you, quite deceptively, I will admit, how easy it is to create a chatbot tutor. So yes, you can do this via the API, but OpenAI, the company that makes ChatGPT, actually have a nice playground. And this got this idea of a system prompt. And a system prompt is how you establish a persona and you can direct the chatbot to function in a particular way. So I've got a question here with the chatbot tutor. So this particular playground, I think you can select whether it's GPT 3.5 or GPT 4. As long as you've signed up to an account, you should be able to get access to the playground itself. So here you'll see I'm basically just giving it instructions to become a grammar tutor. I give it some instructions, teach grammar rules, also be able to correct examples that I give it. And I put some guide rails on it. So be polite and supportive, and then only answer questions related to grammar. So deceptively, I show this to be really simple, and it's very, very easy to then just get straight on the board of, something conversational that you can then test out. But the point I want to make here is It's very easy to get, I would say, 95% of the way to a good chatbot with just a simple prompt. The other 5% of taking this out to production can actually take a really long time because there's different guide rails, there's prompt injection to worry about, and you certainly also don't want this to be giving direct answers some of the time. So you want it to get those characteristics of an actual tutor to help learning. And I think that's really important. And of course, a lot of companies, including large language management systems, which I haven't really reflected in this particular slide, are also starting to develop chatbots. So I think there's class.com, have one. Khanmigo is probably the most prominent that you're aware of. There's Quizlet's QChat and Duolingo Max, each bringing new ideas to the chatbot tutor within their specific domain area. But I think there's a lot of work currently happening where the whole conversational UI idea is being flipped over, where we'll actually try to find this middle ground between user interface and novel interactions with large language models. And particularly already starting to emerge is just different writing assistants. So I've given the example here of Lamppost, which is actually a email writing assistant for adults with dyslexia. And as you can see, it's less conversational chat included inside here, but more so specific UI elements and buttons that do things that, without a large language model wouldn't really be possible, like, rewrite my selection, suggest how I can rewrite. Those are all firing off prompts to ChatGPT, but it's that sort of conversational element is more hidden inside here. But one of the other good points about this to make really is that we're now able to develop applications for more difficult and specific domain areas. So specifically dyslexia over here, that prior to having large language models, we wouldn't have been able to include this functionality. So I can see a number of these type of tools dealing with more complex areas starting to emerge. There's also Metaphorian, and this is a metaphor creation tool for science writing. And again, you can define what you're writing scientifically. It comes up with different metaphors and you can select and explore them in your writing. All of this is, of course, also sitting on top of a large language model. So finally, in this space, I thought this was a more recent example, but also just pushing the capabilities a little bit more. So we always imagine, particularly when you're doing programming, there's obviously the GitHub Copilots, which are directly in your code editor, or you had the other extreme with something like ChatGPT, where you're really conversationally asking something to be developed. However, there needs to be a space between that. So, of course, some of your coding might be more visual, and sometimes it's going to be quite difficult to express, parameters and different things directly just in pure text. So Spellbus really tries to, come up with a UI that can interact with large language models while also showing the programming more visually. And you can see how the, more semantic options to change things. And then when you do select something, it's actually directly converting that into, semantic parameters where, you're now able to drag sliders, which would be interactions that, just trying to do that in a conversational UI is going to be quite hard. So you can see how these different UI or novel interactions are starting to emerge again in applications. So in all of this, there was a huge promise of AutoGPT. And this was, writing a very high-level goal and then getting ChatGPT to go off and solve all of this in itself. It didn't turn out to be as big a success initially as people had imagined, or at least I would say a lot of it might have emerged from a developer community, and a lot of the developers went into a weekend, particularly thinking they were going to build something that was going to earn them $1 million. So give ChatGPT the prompt, earn me $1 million, give it access to some tools, and let's see what happens. I'm actually quite grateful that we didn't really get any share market crashes that came out of this. But nonetheless, this idea of AutoGPT, of ChatGPT itself being able to, come up with its own tasks or subtasks and then perform the action, has turned out to be quite powerful. And you can see here just the amount of large language model based autonomous agent papers that have come out. If I take anything from the whole COVID lockdown and COVID briefings particularly, I can certainly recognize when a chart is about to go exponential here. So a lot of this is really based on personas and getting ChatGPT to actually play different personas to achieve things. And a lot of this has actually been occurring, particularly in the development space. Development, I basically mean programming. And here I refer to MetaGPT, but there are many of these tools, all open source, all on GitHub, where we've basically got ChatGPT with personas to play multiple roles. So yeah, you can see as the role of a product manager, the software architect, the actual programming engineer, and a QA engineer. And all the user has to do is come up with a very high level task. So this is, make the 2048 sliding number puzzle game. And it itself, ChatGPT goes off, comes back with architecture diagrams, programming code, and then it's also including tests and bug fixes inside of this. And you can see from the benchmarks that some of these projects have just how it ranges from really simple ideas to more complex ideas inside there. But what does this all have to do with learning tools and what we're doing? And I go back to the idea from my previous roles, essentially, that these integrations that we do with learning management systems, particularly, they're really expensive, both to create and to maintain with each of the LMS upgrades. It's really difficult at the moment for an actual educator to have an idea for a learning tool, to actually get it implemented within something called an LTI tool, which is an IMS standard. And at the moment, I've got a master's thesis research project to try and look at something called Auto LTI, where we can try to see how this would work with an educator actually providing a high-level specification and then having a way to actually review the generated code. So I'm going to move on now to just how prompting is changing and how this is actually going to impact education. So particularly on my Twitter feed, I see a lot of ChatGPT prompting templates. There's, probably about 20 a day that I do come across. And you can see here, some of those are quite remarkable in what they do with different frameworks. And I particularly look at some of these and think about my initial ideas of high-level thinking and evaluative judgment with the learner being able to read what's coming back and provide feedback. And then I look at something like chain of density as a prompt, and I think about what are the impacts that this is actually going to have on learning. And I've enlarged it here basically. So this chain of density is a new thing that's been happening with prompts. So some of these come out as programmable techniques and then get now incorporated into just templates that you can actually use and run yourself. And you'll see this is an example of ChatGPT, where it's via one prompt, it can actually generate multiple versions of something and continue to read what it's done and then improve on it. So you actually get a whole process that it's gone through to come up with an improvement in here. So think of the implications here when we start talking about, initially with how we're going to address challenges with generative AI, when we talked about the process of learning inside of this, but also that some of these particular techniques can actually produce quite sophisticated results just with a single prompt that might essentially come from a template. You've also got things like a prompt optimizer that, you can actually paste in as a prompt, give your existing initial prompt, and ChatGPT itself will even select an appropriate persona, come up with a new context and instructions, and then produce what it thinks is an optimal prompt. There's a lot of other techniques. So 3 of thought prompting, again, is another one where this is all about, getting different experts to think about a particular problem, come up with ideas, and then combine them. A lot about it actually reminds me of design thinking, essentially. But this just to give you a feel of just where prompting is going and heading. And that's all from, what a user can do just with prompting themselves. But, particularly the latest research that's been coming from DeepMind is actually looking at how prompts can be mutated and then looking at what different wording actually gives better results for things. And yeah, you can see for a particular mathematics problem, the prompt solution that yielded a better result was consider how a better teacher would put this, as opposed to the, normal, let's think step by step. So you can see how just the play of words there can be important to actually make new prompts, but also that we're programmatically discovering what these are. Again, another paper from DeepMind here, and this one actually found what performed better than let's think step by step, which were the previous magic words, turned out to be take a deep breath and work on this problem step by step. So I must admit here, that's probably the technique that I personally use sometimes with debugging programming code. But this is just to give you a feel of how some of the advances of prompting are occurring with this sort of programmatic trials to figure out what words work better. Let's not, of course, discount the multimodal capabilities here either. The latest image analysis, both in Google Bard and ChatGPT, are nothing short of remarkable, particularly the ability to analyze images and extract data from them. And here I give an example where I basically used a Wiki Commons process of photosynthesis without no mention of photosynthesis inside of it, and asked ChatGPT via a simple prompt, can you tell me what process is occurring here, but also recommend topics that I need to learn in order to understand this process. And it was able to actually understand that this was an image of photosynthesis and recommended a few different things for me to look at inside of there. I'm seeing a lot of different interaction with people from this. I particularly teach a subject called web and mobile development. And at the start of the semester, without these imaging capabilities, we could actually give students an example of a mock-up that they need to then convert to HTML. But over the course of this semester, essentially, it is now possible to take that mock-up sketch, put it in ChatGPT or put it in Google Bard, and ask it to actually give you the HTML code inside of it. So something really interesting that, as I was preparing the slide deck, I came across is from Mayreed Pratsky. And I really liked the ideas and thinking that have gone into this framework, which combines a few different ideas. So it's looking at the latest AI and how we can do different chatbot tutors and different personas, combining it with the community of inquiry model, and then having another layer of different types of interactives that can play in each of these spaces. And to me, it just provided a nice way of thinking and connecting all of the dots inside of this, particularly where we currently sit with Gen AI. So I return to this idea of the possibility of now, and I've gone through the four main areas: empowering educators, empowering learners, out-of-domain creators, and tools to scaffold learning. The fifth one I had there was really how I thought the new capabilities of these large language models could actually help us understand the learning process a lot better. And then that I also saw research as playing a very crucial role in helping us mitigate some of the negative impact that this is going to have on learners, particularly, where learners can get direct answers, where very simplistic prompts can actually yield sophisticated results. So Simon Knight and Simon Buckingham-Sham actually coined the term clicks to construct. And this was really because a lot of the data that we collect in learning analytics is really about students clicking on things. But it's been quite difficult to actually map that then to higher level learning constructs that would actually allow us to analyze learning processes a lot more effectively. And I think finally, it's almost in sight that we can use large language models to get some of those higher level classifications. And I've put here a link to, it's a scientific literature review, a systematic literature review that I think has come from the Callum Group and Monash. It was actually on practical and ethical challenges for large language models, but it did provide some categorization for some of the emerging applications. Now, the one that I see there, which is sitting at about 20, which is automated methods to investigate latent constructs, I think is really important. Of course, I don't see this as actioning as fully automated. I obviously still want this more as a decision support for humans in the loop, for our teachers, for our tutors. But those high-level constructs, I think, which are what can really kind of bridge that gap from clicks to actually get us into analyzing these high-level learning processes. So finally, I can't stress the importance of research, and that more research starts to happen and that research gets funded, particularly in this area. And here I call on all learning analytics researchers, all AI ed, intelligent tutoring, educational psychologists, I think across all educational domains. What we've got to recognize is that we're building onto a rapidly changing landscape. But in all of this, as with the prompts that I've shown you for creating chatbot tutors, it's really simple to get 95% of the way. And that other 5% is what taking it to production is what is hard. How do we evaluate these large language models or the products that we're building on them? How do we know that they're actually aiding learning? How do we know if we're calling APIs when the API changes and it now breaks? How do we design based on these products to enhance learning, problem solving, and higher level thinking, particularly given the changing nature of prompting that I've just shown you? How do we track learner interactions with LMS products so that we can actually make these high level constructs? This has proven to be really hard currently with learning analytics, specifically with data that's collected by vendors. It's been really hard to get this back to the institution. I can't stress the importance of having humans in the loop with what we're doing. And we particularly, from an educational context, need to make our own safeguards, address bias and hallucinations in these particular models, and equity, of course. A lot of what I've showed you is coming from the paid subscription version of ChatGPT 4. And essentially, I've found that to be the best model that's out there so far. And I continue to use it because it is. But a lot of this is black box models. And how do we get our own educational version of these large language models? How do we get this research agenda funded? And so with that, I will conclude my talk.
Thanks very much, Aneesha. Let me see, where are you? There you are. So thank you. I just asked individuals to sort of, if there's any questions that come in. We've got about 5 minutes or so to spend a little bit of time on questions. And while we're waiting for people to formulate theirs, I think they gave us a nice overview of just some ways in which, in a prudent, intelligent, focused, planned way, people can really drive the use and the functionality of ChatGPT or LLMs in general. It's much more than just a simple, hey, what should I make for dinner today, which is how it's usually presented as a first engagement, especially with the increased work with data analysis and with the increased capability with GPT vision. There is a ton of opportunity that's really being underutilized. So if you don't mind me asking, you've been playing with a number of different tools for quite a while. You mentioned Llama 2 recently as an open source system. As they become less and less expensive to run and operate, you'll start to see them being deeper and deeper embedded into tools and functionality. So what are you playing with right now? What tools are your go-to? I know you said GPT-4 is your go-to or your preferred, but what are you finding that's promising and interesting and engaging?
I think there's a lot of open source happening at the moment, and I think the main things I've been playing with is a tool called LangChain, So it's a whole lot of tooling that sits, it's more of a programmer's tool, I should say. It's providing a lot of tooling for actually developing applications on top of large language models. So anything like driving agents, creating your prompt templates. More so the push I've seen in the last month or so has been on how to evaluate large language models. The other really interesting element for me, particularly as I've transitioned to more of an academic role, in the last month or two, I haven't really had that much time to play, but there's a LangChain hub, and the most intriguing thing, and I encourage all educators to actually do this, is to go and look at some of the prompts that people are using in their open source tools. It's quite remarkable how they've done, the tree of thought, the chain of density, how they're starting to incorporate those right now into what they're doing, because that, I think, will also have implications for education.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself and I accidentally muted you. So apologies for that. So you'll have to, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, and one of the things I'm finding interesting, you mentioned sort of Auto GPT, or you mentioned these tool sets that really show promising capability, and these ideas, they rarely die. They just sit to the side and fine tune and come back bigger and stronger down the road. So, and certainly LangChain seems to be making appearance more and more as people get deeper down it. What about when you're starting to talk about, say, things like retrieval augmented generation or similar approaches, just ways for trying to bring in external knowledge databases to help make these LLMs become more accurate or more effective in that process? Have you started playing with that at all, or any thoughts on the role that might play in education settings?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the most important things, particularly with education. So what retrieval augmented generation is going to allow us to do, and this is, I think, what most of current chatbot tutors, so if it's, chat to my PDF document or chat to my course, it's actually using a retrieval augmented generation approach. So this is where you've got knowledge that's outside the large language model, and you're using, semantic indexing to actually summarize it and then provide it to the large language model. There's a lot of work coming from both the information retrieval community and open source communities to actually start to address hallucinations and fact checking, and just basically, control the output more. But the whole idea of data fusion, where we can start to actually use knowledge graphs and knowledge trees to now shape the interactions that a chatbot might have, particularly, if you think about all the characteristics that you'd want a good tutor to have. This provides a much more natural way to actually provide this to the system. So I think that's going to be huge for education.
Yeah, and I think what I find interesting is, you made an interesting point. This is barely a year old, and everybody's like, it sucks here, and it sucks here, and it sucks here, and you're like, well, some of the problems are being solved. The currency of the data set. Bing Chat actually, I think, got to that first by adding that as a research layer. I continue to be not totally impressed with Bard. I know we're all waiting on Genesis to make its appearance as sort of the promised next version of it, but to start to see some of these tool sets that enable more accurate LLM interaction, that start to make more use of ways that we can structure and ensure quality and reduce the error that's prone within what LLMs output. I remember early on you were sharing, and you felt that LLMs were a kind of sort of a conversational interface to sort of a large swath of humanity's knowledge. And you talked about, this is, months ago, and you talked about that as an early way of seeing that. And now when you see with things like RAG and other approaches, it almost seems like it's an interface to spotlight knowledge, our organizational knowledge that we care about. And it's a way of interfacing with that more directly. Okay, I know we are getting close to out of time. I'm just going to quickly hearing some great comments come in. So in the thread, in this discussion, you can feel free to have a look at that. There's a question that came in that said, my experience with LMSs has shown that the implementation of AI in the system has been more about rigidly creating courses, replacing teachers, increasing productivity or profitability for course sellers, rather than incorporating features that genuinely support students and teachers. Interesting. Do you notice the same trends? That's a question to you. And how do you assess the immediate and future risks of this trend in education?
Yeah, no, that is exactly right. So first, you'll see institutional productivity starting to take place at the forefront of this. I particularly think educators will use it for their own productivity as well. But I think and this is where what I was, my last few points that I was trying to make with that idea of that research layer really needing to be there, because it's definitely got educational usages. It's just harder to get to, particularly, the easier one that I talked about was content generation is quite easy at the moment. There's, third-party tools that you can subscribe to and generate a course and then pull it in. Deploying a full chatbot is a little bit harder. And, it's either that I'm seeing that that's happening, but it's the educator providing their own API key, because then they have to support that or whatever, or there's just safeguards that are not in place. So it's a little bit harder. And I think it comes back to, those more interesting areas of education need a lot more investment. And we can't be reliant on a single company to deliver them. It's actually going to have to come from a larger set of people, larger set of open source communities, and everything that we've learned from AI Ed the past couple of years, everything that we've learned from learning analytics, all that best practice from intelligent tutoring systems. How do we get that knowledge shared and prompts for those particular techniques shared to actually make that a reality and make it accessible by all is what needs to happen.
Great. All right. I've got a final quick question for you, but someone asked in the question area, how do you explain to a layperson the two concepts when they use Gen AI and LLMs synonymously?
Okay, so I mean, and I was using them quite synonymously. I guess generative AI is really, I would say large language models are really what's powering a lot of these generative AI systems at the moment. So as a base layer, you can, of course, get those in different variants that might not necessarily have all the capabilities. But when I do refer to generative AI specifically, I'm talking about anything that you can actually, it's all about being able to create and generate in my particular term. So it can create text, can create programming code, can even create images. Whereas the base level large language model, you could probably think of doing something like classification. But that has then progressed to become what powers these generative AI. So perhaps a way to think of it is one is the underlying technology and Gen AI being the capability that it provides.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Aneesha, for a brilliant presentation. Always lovely to hear from you. I will pause the recording here. There's another session that's going on pretty much immediately. So jump into Whova and make the flip over there. Aneesha, lovely to have you here. Thanks again.